8:25, welcome back. Live shot from Century Plaza Hotel and Spa. Loving the sunshine outside. Digging this brand new book. David Moscrop, political scientist, back on the BT couch. Too dumb for democracy is the question. Why do we make bad political decisions? And the focus on how we make good ones. Years of research went into this. Welcome back to you. And the fascinating part that stood out to me is the age of the information overload of how we even process what's happening. Dan Levitin, the neuroscience, that's a big focus even before we make decisions.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we aren't exactly built to be bombarded with information 24/7 from, whether you're walking down the street or watching television or scrolling through a social media feed or whatever it may be. We get exhausted. It contributes to information overload. It contributes to actually bad political decision making. The psychologist Barry Schwartz makes this point in a book called The Paradox of Choice. He says actually too much information can be worse than too little information.
And when we have that information, then it comes down to the decision-making process. And as you're breaking down, okay, well, what you perceive, and when we look at the era of Trump, Brexit, Ford Nation, which you touch upon in the book, there are two modes of decision-making that go on with our brains.
Yeah, so, when we think about political decision-making, we like to think of ourselves as rational, dispassionate, cold, calculative machines, right? We sit down, we weigh the facts, we go through them. A lot of the time, we're just sort of on autopilot. We're going off of emotion, for instance, or knee-jerk reaction, gut reaction. That's sort of closer to what you might have thought of human beings 10,000 years ago than in the information age.
The idea of making good decisions, because one, it's identifying the problem that exists here, and this is a very important year given a federal election coming up. Focusing on the process, not outcome, was one of the reminders and helpful reminders I got from this book. Why is that so important to focus on the process and how to think of what to consider?
So it's really tempting to say, well, a good political decision is any decision I like, and a bad political decision is any decision I don't like. The problem is someone comes along and says, well, I don't agree with you, and then you're stuck. There's nowhere to go from there. But if we agree on a process that we think is fair and rigorous and inclusive and based on reasons, on rationality, on autonomy, on reasons that are true, not the product of self-delusion, well, we can agree on that. And then we can at least respect the outcomes that we arrive at, and we can be sure that the outcomes that we reach are the product of something rigorous rather than us, checking our gut and reacting immediately from that.
Well, because it's easy right now when we look at social media, and you mentioned this, the likes, it's very passive, a passive form of engagement as opposed to really focusing and having a productive conversation. I mean, all of the research you did, especially with the neuroscience of how we're reacting, how we're absorbing, what surprised you the most?
So, all of this neuroscience and social psychology and political psychology was just sort of sitting out there when this book came from my doctoral research, and I turned it into a book for, real people, a readable book, I hope. And I was shocked that we didn't, take this information and say, okay, well, we have this idea of ourselves, we have all of this information that suggests it's not quite who we are, and say, well, what does it mean for our politics, and what are we going to do about it? And I was shocked that there was such a gap between the way we think of ourselves and how we behave and the way we actually behave.
So what do you hope in a year where opinions are going to be shared, there's a chance to exercise your votes, what do you invite people to really consider the next time they have a chance to exercise their voice?
Well, a couple of things. One is, have you thought this through in the sense that have you interrogated your reasons? The way I put it is, do you have reasons, and do you have reasons for your reasons? How deep, if you can go down deep, what is driving you? Sit with that, think about that a little bit. And finally, push your politicians to include you more in the democratic process. They're not going to do it unless they're pushed to do it. But if we can include citizens in the civic decision-making processes, participatory budgeting, citizens' assemblies, we're going to end up with more trusting and more robust and a long-lasting democracy. So I'm hoping voters will nudge their politicians on that.
Well, it's a helpful resource on not what to think, but more importantly, how to think. Too Dumb for Democracy, ? Is the name of the book. David Moscrop, he is the author. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for the good work. Greg Harper, he's doing great work out here this morning, too. Enjoying the sunshine down in English Bay.